I stared at the bikers from my porch, the shotgun steady in my weathered hands. 6 of them had rolled up to my farm gate, leather-clad and menacing, their choppers rumbling like angry beasts. The leader, a mountain of a man with a beard down to his chest, stepped forward, demanding access to the back acreage of my property. "This land ain't yours, lady," he growled. But he had no idea who he was dealing with, or what I had buried back there that I would die to protect. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Eleanor Simmons, and for 38 years, I've worked this 200-acre farm in Cottonwood Valley. Most folks around here know me as Ellie, the quiet widow who grows the sweetest corn and raises the finest cattle in 3 counties. What they don't know is that before I was a farmer's wife, I was a military police officer, skills I never thought I'd need again until that sweltering July afternoon when the past came roaring up my gravel driveway. The morning had started, like any other. I woke before dawn, the habit of decades impossible to break even now that arthritis made every movement a negotiation. The roosters were already announcing the day as I pulled on my work clothes. Faded jeans, a chambray shirt, with pearl snaps and boots worn smooth in all the right places. My silver hair went into its usual practical braid, my only concession to vanity, the small turquoise earrings my late husband James had given me on our 20th anniversary. "Another day above ground is a good day," I murmured to his photo on the dresser, a ritual that somehow made the empty house feel less hollow. I headed down to the kitchen, made a pot of coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in, and stepped onto the porch to survey my kingdom while it cooled. The sun was just kissing the eastern fields, turning the dew to diamonds across acres of corn, nearly ready for harvest. To the north, my small herd of black Angus grazed peacefully. The western fields lay fallow this season, resting and rebuilding for next year's planting. And to the south, beyond the old oak windbreak, lay the back 40, the section of land I never farmed, never visited except on one day each year. Today was not that day. I sipped my coffee and mentally mapped out the work ahead, mending the fence in the north pasture, checking on Bessie, who was close to calving, and maybe, if time allowed, canning some of the tomatoes threatening to take over my kitchen counter. Simple tasks, honest work. The rhythm of a life I had grown to love, though it was never the one I had imagined for myself. Before James, before this land, I had been someone else entirely. Growing up in a military family, I'd moved so often that nowhere felt like home. By 18, I knew what I wanted: structure, purpose, and a chance to prove myself. The Army provided all 3. I excelled in training, my small stature belying a fierce determination and natural tactical intelligence that caught my superiors' attention. By 23, I was an MP with specialized training in protective services and threat assessment. For 7 years, I served with distinction. Afghanistan, Iraq. I saw things that still wake me at night, did things I've never spoken of to another living soul. Then came the ambush outside Kandahar. 3 of my unit died. I took shrapnel in my right leg and back. Honorable discharge followed, along with a Purple Heart that stayed in its box in my dresser drawer. Coming home to civilian life, I felt like a stranger in my own country. Too restless for desk work, too broken for the police force, I drifted, until a veterans rehabilitation program placed me as security at an agricultural conference in Des Moines. That's where I met James Simmons, tall, quiet, with eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled, and hands that spoke of decades working the land. "You look like you could use some fresh air," he said, after watching me scan the room for threats that weren't there. "I've got 200 acres of it if you're ever interested." 3 months later, I visited his farm. 6 months after that, I never left. James taught me everything: how to coax life from soil, how to deliver a breech, calf in the middle of a snowstorm, how to find peace in the changing seasons. We married under the old oak tree. No guests except his ancient border collie and the neighboring farmer as witness. I was 31, he was 47, and neither of us cared about the years between us. Land knows the truth of a person, James would say. It doesn't care about your past, only how you tend it now. For 15 wonderful years, we worked side by side, turning his struggling family farm into something that made us both proud. We never had children. My injuries had seen to that. But we built a life rich in other ways. Then came the cancer, swift and merciless. Within 3 months, I was alone again, with nothing but the land and the skills he had passed to me. That was 8 years ago. I had carried on, because that's what you do when the alternative is to crumble. I joined the local agricultural board, mentored young farmers, and kept the Simmons farm producing some of the best crops and livestock in the county. To most people, I was just a capable widow with calloused hands and quiet ways. Few knew about my military background. Even fewer knew about what lay beneath the undisturbed soil of the back 40. James had his secrets when I met him. Don't we all? But his weren't the kind that hurt anyone. Before buying this farm, he had worked for this government, something classified that he rarely discussed. All I knew was that it involved advanced agricultural research, developing crops that could withstand extreme conditions, work that made him proud, but also led to threats serious enough that he eventually retreated to this remote property. 1 day, Ellie, he told me during his final weeks, voice paper-thin but eyes intense. Someone might come looking. If they do, the safe in the barn has everything you need to know. The combination is the day we met, the day we married, and the day we planted the oak saplings. I had nodded, assuming it was the medication talking. After he passed, curiosity led me to the safe. Inside was a sealed envelope with detailed instructions, coordinates, and a warning. What's buried in the back 40 could save millions of lives or destroy them, depending on whose hands it falls into. Trust no one who comes looking for it. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Beneath the documents lay a pistol I didn't recognize and an external hard drive. I followed his coordinates to a spot in the back field, but found nothing unusual. Just soil and native grasses we had allowed to grow wild. Whatever was buried lay deep, undisturbed. I replaced everything in the safe, deciding that respecting his wishes meant protecting whatever secret lay beneath that innocent-looking stretch of land. For 8 years, nothing happened. Until today. The sound of motorcycles broke the morning stillness, unusual enough on this remote country road to make me pause in my work. I was mending fence, hammering a staple into a post when I heard them. The distinctive rumble of heavy bikes being pushed hard. The border collie I'd adopted after James died, an intelligent female named Scout, lifted her head and growled low in her throat. I straightened, my back protesting after an hour bent to the fence line. Through the heat shimmer, I saw them turn, onto my long gravel drive. 6 motorcycles, moving with purpose, dust billowing behind them like storm clouds. Something cold settled in my stomach, a sensation I hadn't felt since my military days. Threat assessment, immediate. "Come, Scout," I murmured, and we moved swiftly toward the house. The shotgun was there, loaded, but not for show. Living alone on a remote farm meant being prepared for coyotes, rabid wildlife, or the occasional methamphetamine-addled trespasser looking for easy pickings. But this felt different. This felt targeted. I made it to the porch as they pulled up in a semicircle at the end of my drive, engines idling with a predatory purr. Not local. I knew most riders in the county. These bikes were expensive, custom, choppers with blacked-out details and no club insignia I recognized. The men wore leather despite the summer heat, faces obscured by helmets with tinted visors. Scout positioned herself at the bottom of the porch steps, hackles raised. I stood at the top, one hand on the porch column, the other reaching behind the door frame for the shotgun I kept there. No point in being subtle. I brought it forward and held it ready but pointed downward. Not threatening, just present. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" My voice carried easily across the yard, stronger than I felt. The lead rider cut his engine and dismounted with a fluid grace that spoke of physical training. The others remained seated, bikes still rumbling. He removed his helmet, revealing a face that might have been handsome once, before life carved its disappointments into it. Beard down to his chest, hair pulled back in a tight ponytail, eyes hidden behind mirrored sunglasses. Late 40s, maybe early 50s, with the hard muscle of someone who worked for it rather than showed it off. Looking for Eleanor Simmons. His voice matched his appearance, rough-edged but controlled. "You found her." I shifted the shotgun slightly, making sure he noticed. "What's your business here?" He smiled, but it didn't reach what I could see of his eyes. "Private matter. Something your husband left behind." My heart stuttered. 8 years of silence, then this. James had been right after all. I kept my expression neutral, thanking God for the poker face that had served me well in war zones and farmers' markets alike. My husband's been dead a long time. Anything of his is mine now. The man started walking toward the porch, confident strides eating up the distance between us. "That's not how this works, ma'am. What he stored here never belonged to him, or to you." I raised the shotgun slightly, not aiming, but no longer casual. "That's close enough. State your business properly or leave my property." He stopped, hands raised in mock surrender, that empty smile still in place. "No need for that. We're all friends here." Friends know each other's names. A slight inclination of his head, acknowledging the point. "You can call me Reeves. My associates and I represent certain interests that funded your husband's research. We've come to retrieve materials that rightfully belong to our employer. Lies wrapped in just enough truth to be dangerous." I'd heard men like him before, in interrogation rooms and war zones, men who believed their cause justified any action, who saw others as obstacles rather than people. "Mr. Reeves, my husband was a farmer. Whatever story you've constructed, you've got the wrong place. Now I'll ask you once more to leave." His smile vanished. "We both know that's not true, Eleanor. Before James Simmons bought this land and played farmer, he was Dr. James Simmons, lead geneticist on Project Verdant Shield. The work he stole when he disappeared belongs to people who've been looking a very long time." Ice filled my veins. The name of the project was in the documents I'd found. He couldn't know that unless he was connected to whatever James had feared. Still, I gave nothing away. "Never heard of it. Now you're trespassing. I've got every right to defend my property. In this state." Reeves sighed theatrically. "We can do this easy or hard, ma'am." "Easy way. You show us to the storage location in your back 40. We retrieve what's ours, and we compensate you generously for your cooperation." "Hard way." He gestured to his companions, who remained menacingly silent on their idling machines. "Well, I don't think either of us wants the hard way." Without warning, Scout lunged forward, barking furiously at Reeves. He flinched back, hand moving instinctively toward his jacket. The movement confirmed what I already suspected. He was armed. "Call off your dog," he snapped, composure cracking. "Scout, enough." The dog retreated to my side, still growling. "Mr. Reeves, I'm going to say this one final time. There is nothing on this property that belongs to you or your employers. My husband was a farmer, nothing more. Now leave, or I call the sheriff." He stared at me through those mirrored lenses, assessing. Then he nodded once, sharply. "We'll go. For now." He turned and walked back to his bike, unhurried. Before mounting, he looked back at me. "Think about our offer overnight, Eleanor. We'll return tomorrow. The generous compensation won't be available then. Neither will our patience." They roared away in formation, leaving nothing but dust and the acrid smell of exhaust. I waited until they were out of sight before lowering the shotgun, my hands trembling now that the immediate threat had passed. Scout whined and pressed against my legs, sensing my distress. "It's okay, girl," I murmured, though it was anything but. James had warned me this might happen. Now it had, and I had just one night to decide what to do. One night to prepare for the confrontation that had been 8 years in the making. The threats weren't idle, I knew that much. Men like Reeves didn't make empty gestures. Whatever lay buried in the back 40, it was valuable enough that they'd risk breaking numerous laws to get it. Which meant I needed to understand exactly what I was protecting before they returned. I secured the house, then made my way to the barn where the old floor safe lay hidden beneath a workbench. The combination came easily, 04 to 27, 1908, the day we met, the day we married, and the day we planted the saplings that now stood as a windbreak along the western edge of the property. Inside, everything remained as I'd left it years ago. The envelope of documents, the hard drive, and the pistol. This time, I read every word of James's notes, not just skimming. Project Verdant Shield had been a government-funded initiative to develop drought and disease-resistant seed stocks that could withstand climate change and ensure food security. But the corporate partner involved, Nexus Agritions, had secretly pushed the research in a different direction, toward patentable genetic modifications that could control when and how crops grew. Seeds that would germinate only when treated with proprietary chemicals. Plants that would produce sterile seeds unless activated by compounds only Nexus could provide. Agricultural slavery, James had scrawled in the margins. They wanted to control the world's food supply. When he discovered their true intent, he copied the research, took key samples of the experimental seed stock, and disappeared. The samples and complete research were what lay buried in the back 40, inside a specialized containment unit that preserved the seeds indefinitely. James had left detailed instructions on how to access it if necessary, with a clear warning. If these fall into Nexus's hands, they gain the power to hold farmers worldwide hostage. If they're released without proper safeguards, they could cross-pollinate with natural crops with unknown consequences. No wonder he had chosen such a remote location. No wonder he'd been so careful. And now they had found me. Found his hiding place. I plugged the hard drive into my laptop. It contained thousands of research files, most too technical for me to understand. But I found James's personal logs, video journals he'd recorded during the project. I clicked on one at random, and suddenly there he was. Younger than I'd ever known him, intense and passionate about his work. "The potential here is revolutionary," he was saying. "Crops that can thrive in depleted soil, resist disease without pesticides, withstand drought conditions." His expression darkened. "But Garrison is pushing us toward controlled germination. Says it's to prevent uncontrolled spread, but the implications." He shook his head. "It's wrong. Once farmers are dependent on Nexus's activation compounds, they'll have no choice but to pay whatever price is demanded." I watched file after file, tears streaming down my face, not just from seeing James alive again, but from understanding the burden he had carried. The final video was dated just months before his death. "Ellie, if you're watching this, they've found us." He looked thin, already showing signs of the illness that would take him. "The containment unit in the back 40 holds enough evidence to expose what Nexus attempted, but more importantly, it contains the countermeasure I developed. Seeds, modified to produce plants that can neutralize their controlled germination technology. Nature's defense against corporate ownership." He leaned closer to the camera. "I trust you to make the right choice. You always do." The screen went black, leaving me alone with an impossible decision. I couldn't fight these men directly. They were younger, stronger, and almost certainly better armed. The sheriff was a 3-term elected official who barely patrolled this far out, and calling the FBI about classified agricultural research stolen decades ago seemed unlikely to bring immediate help. No, this would come down to me, what I knew, what I was willing to risk, and how far I would go to honor James's final wish. I looked down at Scout, who watched me with unwavering loyalty. Looks like we've got work to do, girl. Night was falling as I pulled on my work gloves. The cicadas were beginning their evening chorus, filling the air with sound that would cover my movements. I gathered what I needed: shovel, flashlight, the coordinates from James's notes, and made my way to the back 40. The wildflowers were waist-high in places, undisturbed for years except by wind and wildlife. I followed the GPS on my phone to the exact location James had specified and began to dig. The soil was hard-packed, resistant after years without disturbance. Sweat soaked my shirt despite the cooling evening air. Scout kept watch, occasionally whining when I paused to catch my breath. 3 feet down, my shovel struck something solid. Carefully, I cleared away the surrounding earth until I revealed a metal handle embedded in what appeared to be a concrete panel. Following James's instructions, I pulled the handle and turned it counterclockwise. There was a pneumatic hiss, and the panel shifted slightly. It took all my strength to lift it, revealing a small chamber lined with what looked like refrigeration components. Inside sat a silver case roughly the size of a large briefcase, untouched by time or elements, just as James had promised. I lifted it out, surprised by its weight, and secured the underground chamber again, replacing the soil and doing my best to make the area look undisturbed. Then I carried the case back to the house, moving slowly under its weight, every sense alert for signs of watchers. But the farm remained quiet, except for the night sounds of insects and distant coyotes. Back in the kitchen, I placed the case on the table and entered the combination from James's notes. The latches released with a soft click. Inside, nestled in protective foam, were dozens of sealed vials containing seeds of various shapes and sizes, each meticulously labeled. Beside them lay 3 external hard drives, more comprehensive than the one I'd already viewed, according to James's inventory. Evidence, insurance, legacy. The fruits of James's final act of rebellion against what he saw as a fundamental evil: the corporate ownership of food itself. Dawn found me still at the kitchen table, surrounded by James's research, Scout sleeping at my feet. I had read until my eyes burned, watched video files until I could recite James's arguments from memory. I understood now. The seeds in the containment unit were both the disease and the cure. They contained examples of Nexus's controlled germination technology, but also James's countermeasure: crops designed to produce pollen that would neutralize the Terminator genes. In the right hands, this research could ensure that no corporation ever gained monopolistic control over the world's food supply. In the wrong hands, Reeves's hands, it could be suppressed forever, or worse, refined into exactly the tool of agricultural domination James had feared. I was still sitting there when I heard the motorcycles returning, right on schedule. Scout's head lifted, a growl building in her throat. "It's okay, girl," I said, stroking her head. "I know exactly what to do." I stood up, feeling every one of my 63 years in my aching back and knees. But my mind was clear, my purpose set. James had trusted me to make the right choice. Now I would. As the rumble of engines grew louder, I picked up my shotgun and went to face the men who thought they could intimidate a woman who had survived war, loss, and the unforgiving demands of working this land alone. They had no idea who they were dealing with. The bikers pulled up in the same formation as before, a choreographed display of intimidation. This time, they cut their engines simultaneously, the sudden silence almost as threatening as their presence. I stood on my porch, shotgun resting in the crook of my arm, Scout rigid at my side. I had positioned myself strategically: high ground, clear sight lines, multiple escape routes if needed. Old habits from my military days, awakened by necessity. Reeves dismounted first, removing his helmet and sunglasses in one fluid motion. In the morning light, I could see his eyes clearly for the first time. Cold gray, calculating, the eyes of a man accustomed to getting what he wanted through whatever means necessary. "Morning, Eleanor," he called, his tone falsely casual. "Sleep well?" "Well enough," I answered, not moving from my position. "I see you've decided to trespass again." He smiled, spreading his hands in a gesture of mock reasonableness. "I was hoping we could have a more productive conversation today." He nodded toward the shotgun. "Preferably without that between us." "The gun stays," I said flatly. "And you stay right where you are. Say your piece from there." A flash of irritation crossed his face, quickly masked. He motioned to his companions who remained on their bikes. Two of them dismounted and moved to flank him, a calculated show of force. One was younger, maybe 30, with a military bearing I recognized immediately. The other was massive, arms thick with prison yard muscle, face impassive beneath a patchy beard. "Let's stop dancing around, Eleanor," Reeves said, his voice hardening. "We know exactly what's buried on your land. We know exactly what your husband stole. And we're authorized to offer you $1 million for its return. No questions asked, no consequences. $1 million. The number hung in the air between us. That kind of money would secure the farm for decades, would let me hire help instead of breaking my back daily, would ensure I could maintain the land James and I had loved, even as age made the work harder. But it wasn't my decision to make. Not really. James had entrusted me with something more valuable than money, the freedom of farmers everywhere to control their own destinies, to save their own seeds, to maintain independence from corporate overlords. "Not interested," I replied, my voice steady. Reeves's expression darkened. $2 million. I shook my head. "You're making a mistake," he said, voice dropping to a dangerous register. "We know it's here. We can get a court order." "Try it," I challenged. "Whatever paperwork you think gives you claim to my property won't stand up to local scrutiny. This is farming country, Mr. Reeves. Corporate men in expensive boots don't fare well in our courtrooms." His jaw tightened. "I think you misunderstand the situation. We're not leaving without what we came for." "Then we have a problem." I raised the shotgun slightly, not aiming, but making my point clear. "Because neither am I." The younger man beside Reeves tensed, hand drifting toward his waistband. I adjusted my stance, centering my weight, ready to move if necessary. The atmosphere crackled with potential violence. "Boss," said the younger man quietly, "there's someone coming." A plume of dust rose from the road, a vehicle approaching, at speed. Reeves cast a calculating glance toward it, then back at me. "This isn't over," he said, "not by a long shot." The approaching vehicle was Sheriff Holt's cruiser, its light bar flashing as it turned into my drive. Relief and wariness mingled in my chest. Dan Holt was a decent man, but he wasn't equipped to handle what was unfolding here. The sheriff pulled up alongside the motorcycles, his expression stony as he assessed the scene. He stepped out, hand resting casually near his service weapon. "Morning, Ellie," he called, eyes never leaving the bikers. "Everything all right here?" "Just some gentlemen who got lost," I replied carefully. "I was explaining that they're on private property." Sheriff Holt, 50-ish with the weathered face of a man who'd spent his life outdoors, nodded slowly. "I see. Well, gentlemen, seems like the lady has made herself clear. Why don't you move along?" Reeves turned his cold smile on the sheriff. "We were just leaving, but we'll be back, with paperwork that even you'll have to respect, Sheriff." Holt's expression didn't change. "Until then, I suggest you steer clear of Mrs. Simmons's property." The bikers mounted up, engines roaring to life in a cacophony that sent nearby birds scattering from the trees. As they pulled away, Reeves locked eyes with me one final time. A promise, not a farewell. Once they were gone, Sheriff Holt approached, the porch removing his hat. "You want to tell me what that was really about, Ellie?" I lowered the shotgun, suddenly aware of how tightly I'd been gripping it. "Thanks for stopping by, Dan. Good timing." "Wasn't coincidence," he said, climbing the steps to join me. "Marjorie Mason called, said she saw a group of bikers heading this way for the second day running. Thought it seemed off." Bless Marjorie and her vigilant birdwatching. From her hilltop property, she had views of most roads in the area. "They're after something James left behind," I said, deciding that partial truth was safer than lies. "Something valuable." Dan frowned. "James? But he's been gone." 8 years, I nodded. "I know, it's complicated." "Those weren't ordinary troublemakers," he observed. "Military or private security, I'd guess." I raised an eyebrow and he shrugged. "Did 2 tours in Iraq before coming home to law enforcement. You recognize the type." I hesitated, then made a decision. "Come inside, Dan. There's something you should see." In the kitchen, I showed him James's documentation, not the seeds, or hard drives, just enough of the paperwork to make the situation clear without revealing everything. "Jesus," he breathed, looking up from the files. "This is big." "I know." "You need more than me, Ellie. FBI, maybe." I shook my head. "No time. They'll be back, probably tonight. And next time, they won't be asking nicely." Dan paced the kitchen, hat in his hands. "I can park a cruiser here, but honestly, against professionals like that." He trailed off, the limitations of his small department hanging unspoken between us. "I'm not asking you to fight my battles, Dan," I said gently. "But I could use some time, a distraction." He studied me carefully. "You've got a plan." It wasn't a question, but I nodded anyway. James left instructions. People who should be contacted if this ever happened. People who can make sure this research reaches the right hands. "You trust these contacts? After all this time?" A fair question. "I trust James," I said simply. Dan nodded, understanding the distinction. "All right, I'll do what I can. But Ellie, be careful. Men like that, they don't play by any rules you'd recognize." After he left, I moved quickly. First, I called Samantha Willis, a lawyer in Des Moines who had handled James's estate. James's instructions named her as the first contact in this situation. "Samantha, it's Eleanor Simmons. I need to invoke windbreak protocol." The phrase felt strange on my tongue, a code I'd memorized but never expected to use. A sharp intake of breath on the other end. "Are you certain, Eleanor?" "They're already here." "Understood. Secure the package. I'll make the necessary calls. 24 hours. Can you hold that long?" "I'll have to," I replied, though I wasn't at all certain. Next, I prepared the farm. Living alone for years, I'd developed systems. Alarms made of fishing line and tin cans around the perimeter. Motion sensor lights installed after a string of equipment thefts a few counties over. Nothing high-tech, but enough to warn me of. Approach. I moved the case containing the seeds and hard drives to a new location. Not the house or barn, which would be the obvious search targets. Instead, I carried it to the old storm cellar halfway between the farmhouse and the back field. Seldom used and partially obscured by overgrown shrubs, it was easy to miss if you didn't know it was there. Inside, I placed the case behind preserving, jars and old equipment, then scattered dust to hide any signs of recent entry. Not perfect, but better than leaving it exposed. Back at the house, I prepared for nightfall. I cleaned my shotgun, checked the pistol from James's safe, and positioned Scout's bed away from windows. Poor girl. She sensed my anxiety, staying closer than usual, whining softly when I moved out of sight. "It's okay," I reassured her, scratching behind her ears. We've faced worse, haven't we? As dusk approached, I received an unexpected visitor. Marjorie Mason's ancient pickup rattled up my drive, the 70-year-old former schoolteacher behind the wheel. She carried a covered dish and what looked like a small toolbox. "Evening, Ellie," she called, climbing out stiffly. "Thought you might need dinner, what with all the excitement." I smiled despite myself. "Marjorie, you shouldn't be here. It might not be safe." She waved away my concern. "Please, I've lived in this county since before you were born. Nobody questions an old lady delivering casserole." She handed me the dish. "Besides, thought you might need these too." She opened the toolbox, revealing not tools but her late husband's service revolver and several boxes of ammunition. My eyebrows shot up. "Marjorie, Robert would want it used protecting what matters," she said firmly. "Dan told me enough to know you're in a fix. I may not understand all of it, but I know which side I'm on." Tears pricked at my eyes. Unexpected solidarity when I most needed it. "Thank you." "The whole Mason clan is on alert," she continued briskly. "My boys are taking shifts watching the roads tonight. Anyone heads this way, you'll get a call." The knowledge that I wasn't alone lifted a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying. Sometimes I forgot this was what made rural communities special. Not the isolation, but the invisible connections, the unspoken understanding that neighbors looked out for each other. Night fell completely, the darkness absolute in the way. Only country darkness can be. No streetlights, no ambient city glow, just blackness punctuated by stars. I moved through the house by memory and flashlight, avoiding windows, checking my makeshift alarms every hour. Scout stayed at my side, her hearing far sharper than mine, a living early warning system. Around midnight, my phone buzzed with a text from Tobias Mason, Marjorie's grandson. 6 bikes, no lights, coming south from County Road. They were approaching from the back of the property, smart, avoiding the main road where Sheriff Holt might be patrolling. They'd likely circle around to the rear fields, including the back 40 where they believed their prize remained buried. I texted back a simple, "Thanks," then prepared. I changed into dark clothing, pulled my silver hair under a black cap, and gathered my equipment, shotgun, pistol, flashlight, and an old walkie-talkie set to the frequency Sheriff Holt had given me. I whispered commands to Scout, who would remain in the house. Her barking would only give away my position. Moving silently, I made my way to the storm cellar. If they believed the seeds were still buried, they'd focus their search on the back 40. But I couldn't risk them stumbling upon the cellar during their search. I needed to be there, to protect what James had entrusted to me, or at least ensure it didn't fall into their hands. The night air was heavy with moisture, promising rain by morning. Good. It would obscure tracks, wash away evidence. I reached the cellar without incident and slipped inside, pulling the doors closed behind me but leaving them unlatched for a quick exit if needed. I settled into position in the darkest corner, shotgun across my knees, and waited. Time stretched differently in the darkness, minutes feeling like hours. I controlled my breathing, using techniques from my military days, to remain calm and alert. The first indication that they had arrived was a faint vibration through the ground. Motorcycles, engines muffled but still generating telltale rumbles. Then voices, hushed but carrying in the still night air. Spread out. The old ladies, probably asleep, but don't take chances. 2 of you check the house, 2 on the barn. Jensen, you're with me on the field. Remember, we need the containment unit intact. Reeves. His voice was unmistakable, the authority absolute. They were dividing their forces. Better for me, but still dangerous odds. I eased the walkie-talkie from my pocket and pressed the transmit button 3 times in quick succession, our agreed signal that the intruders had arrived. Sheriff Holt would be mobilizing, but it would take time for him to gather deputies and reach the farm. Minutes passed. I heard movement near. The house saw flashlight beams sweeping across the yard. They were being methodical, professional, not common thieves or intimidators. These were men with training, likely ex-military or private security, as Dan had suggested. A beam of light passed over the cellar doors, pausing momentarily before moving on. My heart hammered in my chest, but I remained still, finger resting lightly alongside the shotgun's trigger guard, not on the trigger itself. Discipline, patience. More time passed. The search party assigned to the house reported back. No one inside. I allowed myself a small smile. They'd been expecting an elderly woman too frightened to leave her home, not a former MP who'd survived firefights in Kandahar. Then came a shout from the direction of the back 40. "Boss! Found something! Ground's been disturbed recently." My stomach dropped. I'd tried to cover my tracks after retrieving the case, but they had equipment, training. Of course they'd find where I'd dug. "Bring the ground-penetrating radar," called Reeves, "and the shovels." They would discover soon enough that the underground chamber was empty. And when they did, they'd expand their search, methodically, relentlessly, until they found the cellar. I had to move. Now, while they were concentrated on the empty hole in the back 40, convinced they were moments from victory. Silently, I eased open the cellar doors and peered out. 2 men near the house, their backs to me as they reported by radio, one visible near the barn. The others, including Reeves, were in the back field, the glow of their lights visible through the trees. I slipped out, staying low, moving from shadow to shadow toward the barn. The case was secure for now, but I needed to create a distraction, something to buy time until Sheriff Holt arrived. I reached the equipment shed adjacent to the barn without being spotted. Inside were the farm vehicles, tractor, my old pickup, and James's pride and joy, a restored 1965 Ford Mustang we'd only driven on special occasions. The keys hung on hooks by the door, each labeled in James's meticulous handwriting. A plan formed, desperate but with potential. I took the Mustang keys, then sabotaged the other vehicles. Spark plugs removed, distributed into my pockets. If my gambit failed, at least they wouldn't have easy transport. I opened the shed's rear door, revealing the back access to our property, a dirt track that wound through the eastern fields before connecting with a county maintenance road. Seldom used, overgrown in places, but passable in good weather. The Mustang's engine would alert them immediately, but that was part of the plan. I slid behind the wheel, inserted the key, and took a deep breath. "Sorry, James," I whispered. "She's going to get a bit rough." I turned the key. The engine roared to life, a sound impossible to miss in the quiet night. Immediately, shouts erupted across the property. Flashlight beams swung toward the shed. I threw the car into reverse, backing out fast enough to send gravel flying, then shifted and accelerated down the dirt track. In the rearview mirror, I saw figures running toward the vehicles I'd disabled, heard curses as they discovered my sabotage. But 2 motorcycles roared to life, headlights cutting through the darkness. As they gave chase, the Mustang was powerful but unwieldy on the rough track. I fought the steering wheel, pushing the car harder than it was meant to go on such terrain. Behind me, the motorcycles gained ground, more maneuverable, but still slowed by the uneven surface. My hands were steady on the wheel, muscle memory from training exercises and combat driving taking over. The track curved sharply. I drifted around it, feeling the rear wheels lose traction momentarily before catching again. One of the pursuing bikes missed the curve, skidding into the adjacent field with a satisfying crash. But the second rider was skilled, matching my movements, closing the distance. The maintenance road was just ahead, gravel but smoother than the dirt track. I'd gain speed there, but so would my pursuer. As I hit the gravel, accelerating hard, headlights appeared. Ahead, vehicles approaching from the north. For a moment, I feared reinforcements for Reeves. Then I recognized the light configuration of Sheriff Holt's cruiser leading the procession. I flashed my lights rapidly, signaling distress. The cruiser's light bar activated in response, filling the night with red and blue pulses. Behind me, the motorcycle abruptly cut its headlight, veering off onto a side trail, unwilling to confront law enforcement. I braked hard, bringing the Mustang to a sliding stop as Sheriff Holt's cruiser pulled alongside. 3 more vehicles followed. 2 more cruisers and a truck I recognized as belonging to Tobias Mason. Dan leaped out, weapon drawn. "Ellie, you all right?" I nodded, adrenaline still coursing through my system. "They're at the farm. At least 6 of them, armed, searching for what James hid." "We heard," he said grimly. "Your walkie transmission came through. Deputies are approaching from the south side, too." "The seeds," I said urgently. "The research. It's in the storm cellar." "We can't let them find it." Dan's eyes widened slightly at the mention of seeds. I hadn't shared that detail earlier, but he nodded without questioning further. "Mason, Rodriguez, stay with Mrs. Simmons. The rest of you, with me." "No," I said firmly. "I'm coming with you. It's my farm, my responsibility." He looked like he wanted to argue, but something in my expression stopped him. He recognized the look of someone who would not be swayed. "Stay behind us," he conceded. "And for God's sake, be careful." We formed a convoy, heading back toward, the farm via the main road, faster than the rough track I'd used for my escape. As we approached, I could see flashlights still moving across my property, concentrated now around the house and outbuildings. They were expanding their search, just as I'd feared. Sheriff Holt coordinated with the deputies approaching from the south, timing our arrival to cut off escape routes. It was a solid plan, except for one crucial detail. Men like Reeves always had contingencies. As our headlights swept the property, a previously unseen vehicle roared to life from behind the barn, a heavy-duty SUV with off-road capabilities. It accelerated across the yard toward the backfields, clearly aiming to escape via the rough terrain where cruisers couldn't follow. "The cellar!" I shouted. "They're heading right for it." Dan barked orders into his radio, but it was too late. The SUV skidded to a halt near the overgrown shrubs concealing the cellar doors. Reeves leaped out, flanked by the young man I'd noted earlier, both carrying tactical flashlights that illuminated the cellar entrance. Sheriff Holt's cruiser slid to a stop, deputies deploying behind it, weapons raised. "Nexus Aggressant Security," Holt bellowed through his PA system. "You are trespassing on private property. Put your hands up and step away from the building." For one tense moment, I thought Reeves might surrender, caught in the overwhelming show of force. Then I saw him reach into his jacket. "Gun!" someone yelled, and everything exploded into chaos. Deputies fired warning shots. Reeves and his companion dove through the cellar doors. More vehicles arrived, the Southern Approach deputies, boxing in the remaining intruders scattered across my property. I broke away from the protective circle, running toward the cellar despite shouts to stay back. I couldn't let them destroy James's legacy, couldn't let them escape with the seeds that represented both danger and salvation. As I approached, gunfire erupted from within the cellar, not aimed at me but at the deputies following behind. I dove to the ground, crawling toward the partial cover of a nearby tractor tire. "Ellie, stay down," Dan shouted from somewhere, to my left. But staying down meant letting Reeves win, letting James down, letting down farmers everywhere who would be enslaved by Nexus's technology if these seeds and research disappeared. I had made a promise, not just to James, but to myself. And Eleanor Simmons kept her promises. Rain began to fall as I calculated. My next move, the first drops hitting my face like a baptism, washing away fear and leaving only determination in its wake. The rain intensified, cascading down in silver sheets that transformed the farm into a battlefield of mud and confusion. I pressed myself against the tractor tire, my clothes already soaked through, heartbeat thundering in my ears. Gunfire continued to erupt from the cellar, short, controlled bursts designed to keep the deputies pinned down rather than hit specific targets. Professional suppression fire. Through the downpour, I caught glimpses of Sheriff Holt organizing his deputies into a perimeter, their vehicles' emergency lights painting the rain in alternating red and blue strobes. They had numbers and firepower, but Reeves had position, defensible with limited access points, and decades of training I could recognize in his tactics. "Ellie," Dan's voice carried through the din. "Stay where you are. We've got this contained." But contained wasn't good enough. Every minute Reeves remained barricaded in that cellar was another minute he could spend accessing the case, examining the seeds, downloading the research from the hard drives. Everything James had sacrificed to protect could be lost in an instant. A fresh barrage of gunfire erupted, followed by the distinctive pop of a smoke grenade. Gray plumes billowed from the cellar entrance, obscuring visibility further. They were creating cover for something. An escape attempt? A strategic repositioning? I closed my eyes, pulling from memories I'd buried long ago. The layout of the cellar flickered across my mind. Single entrance, no windows, root vegetable storage along the north wall, preserves on the east, old equipment scattered throughout. But there was something else, something James had shown me years ago that few people knew existed. When this place was built, he had explained, crouching in the far corner of the cellar, folks were worried about tornadoes, sure, but also about Soviet missiles. Lot of paranoia in those days. He had pushed aside an ancient barrel, revealing a narrow passage. Emergency exit. Comes up behind the oak windbreak. Previous owner was quite the survivalist. My eyes snapped open. They wouldn't be making a frontal assault through the smoke. They'd be using the tunnel. I scrambled to my feet, keeping low, and circled away from the standoff. The rain provided perfect cover, reducing visibility and muffling the sound of my movement across the sodden ground. I made for the oak windbreak, mentally calculating where the tunnel exit should emerge. The trees stood like sentinels against the storm, their massive trunks black silhouettes in the darkness. I reached them just as the ground shifted slightly, at the base of the largest oak. A camouflaged hatch, nearly invisible against the forest floor, lifted slowly. I pressed myself against the nearest trunk, the pistol from James's safe now gripped firmly in my hand. Water streamed down my face, into my eyes, but I blinked it away, focus absolute. A gloved hand emerged first, then a tactical flashlight, sweeping the immediate area. I held my position, unmoving, barely breathing. Then Reeves pulled himself. From the ground, the silver case clutched in his other hand. The younger man followed closely behind, weapon at the ready. "Clear," he whispered to Reeves. Vehicles waiting beyond the tree line, 2 minutes out. My heart sank. Of course they'd have an extraction plan. Professionals always did. The confrontation at the cellar was merely a distraction while they secured their real objective. "Move," Reeves ordered. "Maintain cover until we reach the rendezvous." They were going to disappear into the night with everything James had died to protect. I couldn't let that happen. Not after all this. Not after James had trusted me to be his final guardian. I stepped from behind the tree, pistol raised. "Stop right there." Both men whirled, weapons instinctively raising toward the sound of my voice. Water dripped from the barrel of my gun, but my grip was steady, my aim true, centered mass on Reeves, just as I'd been trained. "Mrs. Simmons," Reeves said, his voice unnervingly calm despite having a weapon pointed at him. "I admire your persistence, but this is over. Step aside." "Put the case down," I replied evenly. His lips curled into something approximating a smile. "Or what? You'll shoot me?" "I don't think you have it in you, Eleanor. You're just a farmer, an old woman who's in over her head." The younger man shifted slightly, trying to flank me, but I adjusted my position, keeping both men in my field of vision. "I was an MP before I was a farmer," I said. "Served in Kandahar. I've faced worse men than you." Something flickered across Reeves's face. Reassessment. The rain plastered my silver hair to my head, my clothes to my body. But I stood straight, unmoved by the storm's fury or the weapons aimed at my chest. "Even if you managed to shoot one of us," he said carefully, "the other would fire immediately. You'd die, and we'd still take the case. There's no scenario where you win here, Eleanor." He was right, and we both knew it. But sometimes winning isn't about walking away unscathed. Sometimes it's about ensuring that what matters survives, even if you don't. "I don't need to win," I told him, my voice carrying clearly through the rain. "I just need to make enough noise to bring the sheriff running." Reeves's expression hardened. "We'll be gone before they figure out what happened." "Will you?" I challenged. "Because while we've been talking, I've been transmitting everything on an open channel." I tilted my head slightly, indicating the small radio clipped to my collar. The one Sheriff Holt had given me earlier, still active, still broadcasting. "They've heard every word." It was a gamble. I wasn't certain the transmission was getting through the storm, wasn't certain anyone was listening on the right frequency. But doubt crept into Reeves's eyes. The first genuine uncertainty I'd seen from him. "Bullshit," he snarled, taking a menacing step forward. I held my ground. "Try me." The younger man's eyes darted nervously between us and the woods beyond. "Boss, we need to move. Extraction window's closing." Reeves made a split-second decision. "Kill her. We need to go." As the younger man's finger tightened on his trigger, a blinding light burst through the trees, accompanied by the roar of an engine. A vehicle, not one of theirs, crashed through the underbrush, its high beams momentarily disorienting both men. I dropped to the ground as Tobias Mason's truck plowed into the clearing, horn blaring. Behind it came flashlights, voices, the pounding of feet through mud. Sheriff Holt and his deputies had found us. Chaos erupted again. The younger man fired wildly at the approaching truck. Reeves, clutching the case to his chest, tried to sprint for the woods. I scrambled to my knees, took aim, and fired, not at Reeves, but at the case in his arms. The bullet struck with a metallic ping. Reeves stumbled, the case flying from his grasp, tumbling through the air before crashing into the mud several yards away. I lunged for it, diving through the muck as gunfire continued around me. My hands closed around the handle just as a boot slammed down on my wrist. White hot, pain shot up my arm. I looked up to find Reeves standing over me, his face contorted with rage, rain streaming down his features like tears. "You have no idea what you're interfering with," he hissed, grinding his heel harder into my wrist. "This technology could feed billions. Or control them," I gasped through the pain. James knew what Nexus really wanted. Something shifted in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, that I understood the full implications of what I was protecting. Then his gaze hardened again. "You're just like him, a bleeding heart who can't see the bigger picture." "I see it fine," I managed. "That's why I can't let you have this." With my free hand, I grabbed his ankle and twisted with every ounce of strength I possessed. Age had diminished my physical power, but desperation compensated. Reeves lost his balance on the slick ground, toppling backward with a curse. I scrambled to my feet, case clutched to my chest, as deputies converged on us from all directions. Tobias Mason's truck had stopped nearby. The young farmer now crouched behind it with a hunting rifle, covering the scene with grim determination. "Down! Everybody down!" Sheriff Holt's voice boomed through the chaos. "Hands where I can see. Them." The younger man who had been with Reeves was already face down in the mud, a deputy's knee in his back as he was being cuffed. But Reeves had regained his footing, and in his hand gleamed a small device I hadn't noticed before. Compact, metallic, with a blinking red light. "Nobody move," he shouted, holding it aloft. "This is a remote detonator. We came prepared for resistance." Everything froze. Rain continued to pour, but all human movement ceased as the implications of his words sank in. Explosives are placed throughout the property, Reeves continued, his voice steady despite the dire situation. One press, and this place becomes a crater. Now, Mrs. Simmons is going to hand over the case and my team is going to leave. Anyone attempts to follow, anyone makes a call, I trigger the explosives. Understood? My blood ran cold. The farm, James's legacy, my home for decades, rigged to explode. I believed him capable of it. Men like Reeves didn't make empty threats. Sheriff Holt stepped forward cautiously, hands raised placatingly. Let's all calm down here. There's no need for this to escalate further. The case? Reeves demanded, eyes locked on mine. Now, Eleanor. I clutched it tighter, mind racing. If I surrendered it, James's sacrifice would be for nothing. If I refused, everyone here could die. Dan, Tobias, the deputies who had come to help me. The weight of the decision pressed down harder than the rain hammering against my shoulders. Then, through the storm's fury, came an unexpected sound, the deep, throaty bark of a dog. Scout had escaped the house somehow, tracking me through the chaos. She burst from the underbrush, a black and white missile aimed directly at Reeves. He turned, startled by the new threat, finger tightening instinctively on the detonator. In that split second of distraction, Sheriff Holt made his move, tackling Reeves to the ground. The detonator flew from his hand, landing in a puddle several feet away. "Get back!" Dan shouted. "Everyone back!" We scattered, expecting an explosion. That never came. Water had seeped into the device, shorting its electronics. The red light blinked once more, then died. Scout reached me, pressing against my legs, whimpering with concern. I sagged against her, the adrenaline that had kept me going suddenly draining away, leaving only exhaustion in its wake. Deputies swarmed Reeves, securing him despite his violent resistance. The case remained clutched in my arms, mud-splattered, but intact. We had won. Somehow, against all odds, we had won. Ellie, Sheriff Holt approached, his uniform soaked through, concern etched on his features. "Are you hurt?" I shook my head, though my wrist throbbed where Reeves had ground his, booed into it. "I'll live." He nodded toward the case. "That what they were after?" "Yes." "Important enough for all this?" I met his gaze steadily. "Important enough to die for." He absorbed that, then nodded slowly. "We need to sweep the property, make sure there are no actual explosives. Can't take chances." "Of course." As the deputies secured the scene, Tobias, Mason approached, rifle now slung over his shoulder. "Grandma sent me," he explained, almost sheepishly. "Said you might need backup. Guess she was right." I managed a smile despite everything. "Your timing was perfect, thank you." "What happens now?" he asked, glancing at the case. A good question. The immediate danger had passed, but the larger threat remained. As long as the seeds and research existed, others would come looking. Perhaps not as overtly as Reeves, but with the same dangerous intentions. "Now," I said, determination steadying my voice, "I fulfill my promise to James." Dawn broke over Cottonwood Valley, painting the aftermath of the night's violence in soft gold and rose. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world washed clean, if forever changed. My farmyard resembled a military occupation. Cruisers, evidence technicians, FBI agents who had arrived hourly after Sheriff Holt made his reports. The bikers had been detained, their identities confirming what I'd suspected. Former military and private security, hired by Nexus aggressions through cutouts and shell companies. Plausible deniability at every level, corporate thuggery draped in legality. True to Reeves's word, explosives had been found. Strategically placed charges around the property's perimeter, designed to create confusion rather than maximum damage. A terrorist tactic meant to cover their escape if needed. The bomb squad spent hours ensuring every device was neutralized, I sat on my porch, a blanket draped around my shoulders despite the growing warmth of the morning. Scout lay at my feet, unwilling to leave my side after the night's trauma. My wrist had been bandaged by paramedics, sprained, not broken, though the deep bruising would take weeks to fade. Samantha Willis, James's attorney, stood beside me, her crisp pantsuit incongruous against the mud and chaos of the farm. She had arrived an hour earlier, accompanied by two people she introduced only as the contacts, a stern-faced woman with government credentials she declined to explain in detail, and a soft-spoken man whose knowledge of agricultural genetics became apparent within minutes of examining the case's contents. "It's all here," the man said, wonder in his voice as he catalogued the seed vials. Every variant, every experimental line, complete with James's notes on each cross. He looked up at me, eyes bright with what I recognized as scientific excitement. This is revolutionary work, decades ahead of where we are now. The stern woman's expression never changed. And dangerous in the wrong hands, exactly as Dr. Simmons feared. She turned to me. "Your husband was right to hide this, and you were right to protect it." I nodded, too exhausted for words. The case now sat open on a portable table they had set up, its contents carefully being documented and secured in specialized containers. "What happens to it now?" I asked finally. Samantha answered, her voice gentle. "Exactly what James wanted. The evidence of Nexus's attempt to control the global seed supply goes to regulatory authorities and independent watchdog groups. The countermeasure seeds he developed will be secured, studied, and eventually used to ensure no corporation can ever monopolize essential food crops. And the farm? Remains yours, with additional security measures if you want them." Samantha smiled slightly. "Though after last night, I doubt Nexus will risk another attempt. Too much exposure." I gazed out over my land, the cornfields shimmering in the morning light, the cattle grazing peacefully, unaware of how close their world had come to chaos. My world. James's world. "I'm staying," I said firmly. "This is home." Sheriff Holt approached, looking as exhausted as I felt. He'd remained throughout the night, coordinating with federal authorities, managing the scene with steady competence. "How are you holding up?" he asked, settling onto the porch step with a groan. "I've been better. I've been worse." He chuckled softly. "That about sums it up." He glanced at the officials still swarming the property. "Never thought I'd see Cottonwood Valley crawling with FBI. "Never thought I'd be in a gunfight at my age," I countered. "About that." His expression grew serious. "What you did last night, Ellie. That was something. Most people would have hidden, let the professionals handle it. You ran straight toward the danger." I shrugged, uncomfortable with the implied praise. It was my responsibility. "It was brave as hell is what it was." He hesitated. "You know, a story like this will spread. People talk." I understood his concern. The official story would be sanitized, details classified, but in a community like ours, word would travel. Rumors would grow. The truth would be stretched and reshaped until Eleanor Simmons became something more than a widow with a small farm. "Let them talk," I said simply. "I know who I am." As the day progressed, neighbors began to arrive. Marjorie Mason first. Of course, bearing fresh coffee and an iron determination to see for herself that I was all right. Then others, farmers and townspeople I'd known for decades, bringing food, offers of help, and the simple reassurance of community that had sustained me since James's death. They didn't ask for details, respecting the government vehicles and stern-faced agents as signals that some things were better left unquestioned. Instead, they set about the practical business of helping, cleaning up debris from the storm and the confrontation, repairing the damage to my barn where a stray bullet had splintered wood, bringing order back to chaos. By afternoon, Samantha and her companions had packed up the last of James's legacy, preparing to transport it to secure facilities where it would fulfill its intended purpose. The woman with the government credentials approached me one final time. "Mrs. Simmons," she said formally, "on behalf of agencies I'm not at liberty to name specifically, I want to thank you for your service. What you protected here will save countless lives and livelihoods." I nodded, uncomfortably aware of the neighbors within earshot, curious despite their pretense of disinterest. "James did the hard part," I said. "I just kept a promise. Sometimes that's the hardest thing of all." She handed me a business card with only a name and number. "If you ever need anything at all, please call. We take care of our own." As they drove away, the silver case secured in a diplomatic pouch with more security features than I cared to contemplate, I felt a curious lightness. The burden James had carried, that I had inherited, was now shared by those equipped to bear it. Not gone, but distributed, like the weight of a harvest divided among many hands. Marjorie appeared at my side, a fresh mug of coffee in her weathered hands. "Well," she said matter-of-factly, "that was quite a ruckus." I laughed, genuinely laughed for what felt like the first time in days. "That's one way of putting it. You gonna tell me what was really in that fancy case?" I sipped the coffee, considering. "Would you believe me if I said seeds?" She snorted. "Seeds don't bring the FBI to Cottonwood Valley. But," she raised a hand when I started to respond, "I reckon if it was important enough for you to face down armed men, it's important enough for me to not ask too many questions." We stood in comfortable silence, watching as the last of the government vehicles prepared to depart. Sheriff Holt was conferring with FBI agents, nodding occasionally, his posture conveying the protective territoriality of a local law enforcement officer reclaiming jurisdiction. "You know," Marjorie said thoughtfully, "James would have been proud of you." The words touched something tender within me. "You think so?" "I know so." She gestured toward the farm, muddy and battered but standing. "You protected what matters. That's what he always said about you, you know. Ellie knows what matters." As the sun began its westward descent, casting long shadows across the land James and I had loved, I felt his presence more strongly than I had in years. Not as a ghost or a memory, but as a continuation, a thread connecting past to future through the choices we make, the stands we take, the seeds we plant. The neighbors gradually dispersed, returning to their own farms and lives, leaving behind casseroles and promises to check in tomorrow. Sheriff Holt was the last to go, pausing at his cruiser to give me a long, appraising look. "You really okay to be alone tonight?" he asked. "I could have a deputy stay." I shook my head. "I've got Scout. And honestly, Dan, I think I've seen enough uniforms for a while." He smiled tiredly. "Can't argue with that. Call if you need anything at all." As twilight softened the horizon, I walked the perimeter of my property, Scout trotting faithfully beside me. The land felt different somehow, not just physically altered by the night's violence, but cosmically changed. Sacred almost. Ground that had been defended at great risk, that had held secrets worth protecting. I paused at the oak windbreak, touching the rough bark of the tree that had sheltered me during the confrontation with Reeves. Its roots ran deep into the soil where James's most important work had been buried for years. Not just the seeds themselves, but the idea they represented. The belief that knowledge belongs to humanity, not corporations. That food security is a right, not a commodity to be controlled. "We did it, James," I whispered to the evening breeze. "We kept your promise." Scout whined softly, pressing against my legs. I scratched behind her ears, grateful for her steadfast presence throughout the ordeal. "Come on, girl," I said, turning back toward the house. "Let's go home." The farmhouse lights glowed warm against the gathering darkness, a beacon of continuity in a world where everything had changed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Statements to government agencies, repairs to damaged property, curious questions from neighbors too polite to ask directly. But tonight, I was simply Eleanor Simmons, farmer, widow, protector of seeds and stories alike. And for the first time in 8 years, I felt James's approval not as a memory, but as a presence, as real and solid as the land beneath my feet. 3 months after what locals had taken to calling the incident at Simmons' farm, life had found a new rhythm. Autumn painted the valley in amber and crimson, the corn harvest complete, fields resting under the first light frosts. My days returned to their familiar pattern, caring for livestock, preparing the farm for winter, attending agricultural board meetings in town. If neighbors regarded me differently now, with a certain quiet respect, occasionally tinged with curiosity, I pretended not to notice. The physical reminders of that night had faded. The torn-up ground where vehicles had churned mud into chaos was smoothed and reseeded. The splintered barnwood where bullets had struck was replaced, the new plank standing out slightly lighter against the weathered gray. Even my wrist had healed, though it still ached before rain, a barometer I hadn't asked for but now relied upon. What hadn't faded were the questions. Despite official statements about armed trespassers and attempted theft of valuable agricultural research, speculation ran rampant. Small towns thrive on stories, and mine had all the elements of a blockbuster: mysterious government agents, midnight gunfights, a silver-haired widow standing her ground against armed intruders. I neither confirmed nor denied the wilder theories, letting the gossip swirl around me while keeping my focus on the land. The work of a farm waits for no one, not even local celebrities. That Tuesday morning began like any other. I woke before dawn, made coffee, and stepped onto the porch to watch the sun breach the horizon. Scout bounded ahead of me, disappearing into the mist that clung to the pasture like a memory. The air held the sharp edge of impending winter, a warning to complete preparations before the first heavy snow. My phone buzzed, a text from Samantha Willis. "Turning on TV might interest you. Channel 8. Curious? I went inside and powered up the small television I rarely used. The national news was running a breaking story. Agricultural giant Nexus under federal investigation. I turned up the volume as footage showed FBI agents exiting the company's gleaming corporate headquarters, boxes of documents in hand. A stunning development. Federal authorities have raided the offices of Nexus Agritions following allegations of illegal genetic research, corporate espionage, and attempted monopolization of essential food crops, the anchor announced. Sources close to the investigation cite evidence provided by a whistleblower that Nexus was developing technology to control seed germination, potentially giving the corporation unprecedented power over global food production. My breath caught. James's research, his warnings, his sacrifice, all validated in this moment of public reckoning. The anchor continued. Multiple arrests have been made, including Nexus CEO Richard Garrison, who was taken into custody at his Hamptons estate early this morning. The screen showed a silver-haired man in an expensive suit being escorted to a waiting vehicle, his face contorted with indignation. I recognized him immediately from James's video journals, the man who had pushed the research toward corporate control rather than humanitarian benefit. The phone rang, startling me out of my trance. "Samantha. Are you watching?" she asked without preamble. "Yes." My voice sounded distant to my own ears. "Is this because of what you protected?" Absolutely. The evidence was irrefutable. Once properly analyzed, they couldn't bury it this time. "And Reeves?" I asked, thinking of the cold-eyed man who had led the assault on my farm. "Cooperating with authorities in exchange for leniency. Turns out he knows where a lot of bodies are buried, metaphorically speaking, thank goodness." I sat heavily, in my kitchen chair, emotions swirling too fast to process. Relief, Vindication, a bittersweet sadness that James hadn't lived to see this day. "There's more," Samantha continued. "The countermeasure seeds James developed? They're being released to an international agricultural trust, open source, available to farmers worldwide. No patents, no restrictions." Tears welled unexpectedly. That's what he would have wanted. "I know." Her voice softened. "There's something else. The trust wants to name the first seed line after him. Simmons Heritage. They're asking for your permission. A memorial not of stone or words, but of living, growing things that would feed people for generations to come." Nothing could have been more fitting. "Yes," I whispered. "He would like that very much." After hanging up, I sat in the quiet kitchen, letting the magnitude of the news settle over me. Justice, so long delayed, was finally being served. James's work would help rather than harm. The risk we had taken, the stand we had made, had mattered. The moment was interrupted by Scout's urgent barking. I moved to the window and saw a black SUV pulling up my drive. Not military or government issue this time, but sleek, corporate, out of place against the rustic backdrop of my farm. Old instinct stirred. I grabbed the shotgun from its place beside the door, though I kept it pointed downward as I stepped onto the porch. Scout positioned herself in front of me, hackles raised, her loyalty unwavering despite the peaceful months since the confrontation. The SUV stopped at a respectful distance. The driver's door opened and a woman emerged. Trim, professional, mid-50s perhaps, with the measured movements of someone used to being observed. She wore a tailored pantsuit and carried a leather portfolio, her hair swept into a precise updo that spoke of boardrooms rather than barnyards. "Mrs. Simmons?" she called, remaining beside her vehicle, hands visible. "My name is Catherine Westcott. I'm from the Lowell Foundation. I was hoping we might speak." I didn't lower the shotgun. "What's the Lowell Foundation, and what business do you have here?" She smiled slightly, unperturbed by my wariness. "We're a nonprofit organization focused on sustainable agriculture and food security. And as for why I'm here, well, that's a conversation I'd prefer to have sitting down, if you're amenable." I studied her, the confident posture, the direct gaze, the absence of fear despite being greeted by an armed woman. After a moment's consideration, I nodded. "Come up to the porch then. Scout, stand down." The dog relaxed marginally but maintained her vigilant position as Catherine approached. Up close, I could see the intelligence in her eyes, the purpose in her bearing. This was a woman on a mission, though what that mission might be remained unclear. "Thank you for seeing me," she said, taking the seat I indicated, "especially given your recent experiences with unexpected visitors." I remained standing, shotgun now leaning against the rail but within easy reach. "You seem well informed." "I make it my business to be." She opened her portfolio, extracting a slim folder. "Mrs. Simmons, I'll be direct. The Lowell Foundation has been monitoring Nexus aggressions for years, gathering evidence of their attempts to monopolize crucial agricultural technologies. Your husband's research was the missing piece we needed." She handed me the folder. Inside were newspaper clippings, research summaries, photographs, a documented history of Nexus's most questionable practices, spanning decades. "We've been waiting for this moment," she continued. "The chance to not just stop Nexus, but to transform agricultural research itself, to ensure that innovations benefit humanity rather than shareholders." I leafed through the documents, recognition dawning. "You knew James." It wasn't a question, but she nodded anyway. "Not personally, but by reputation. His work on drought-resistant strains was legendary in certain circles. When he disappeared, those of us watching Nexus suspected why." I closed the folder, handing it back. "So now that Nexus is being dismantled, your mission is complete. Congratulations. Why come to me? Catherine leaned forward, intensity radiating from her. Because our work is just beginning, Mrs. Simmons. Nexus is one company. There are others pursuing similar goals, other attempts to control rather than share agricultural innovation. We need people who understand the stakes, people with courage and conviction. She paused meaningfully. People like you. I almost laughed. I'm a 63-year-old widow with a small farm and arthritis that tells me when it's going to snow. What exactly do you think I could do for your foundation? Serve on our advisory board. Help us identify threats similar to what Nexus posed. Share your experience, your perspective. She gestured to the farm around us. This isn't just land to you. It's a calling. That's the mindset we need. The proposal was so unexpected, I couldn't immediately formulate a response. Me, advising a global foundation? It seemed absurd, disconnected from the life I'd built. Catherine seemed to read my thoughts. You stood against armed men to protect what your husband entrusted to you. You recognized the value of his work, when others saw only profit potential. That discernment is rare and valuable. I moved to the porch railing, gazing out over my fields. The morning mist had burned away, revealing the landscape in crisp autumn clarity. The cattle grazing contentedly, the fallow fields resting before next season's planting, the distant tree line blazing with color. I have responsibilities. Here, I said finally. This farm doesn't run itself. We're not asking you to leave, Catherine clarified. Most of our work is conducted remotely. Quarterly meetings in person, the rest via video conference. We would compensate you for your time, of course. I turned back to her, studying her face for signs of deception or ulterior motive. I found none, only earnest determination and what appeared to be genuine respect. I need time to consider this. She nodded, producing a business card which she placed on the small table between us. Of course. Take all the time you need. My direct line is on the card. And Mrs. Simmons, regardless of your decision, what you've already done has made an immeasurable difference. After she departed, I remained on the porch, Catherine's offer circling my thoughts like hawks over a field. The idea was simultaneously flattering and terrifying, stepping beyond the boundaries of my farm, my community, into a global arena where the stakes affected millions. What would James say? The question formed naturally, as it had so many times since his death. I could almost hear his response. The land knows the truth of a person. What truth does this opportunity reveal about you, Ellie? I called Samantha that evening, after chores were complete and dinner dishes washed. The legal details of the Lowell Foundation checked out. A legitimate nonprofit with impeccable credentials and substantial funding from sustainable agriculture proponents. Catherine Westcott herself had an impressive background, PhD in agricultural economics, former UN advisor, respected activist for small farmers' rights worldwide. It's a remarkable opportunity, Samantha observed, though I understand your hesitation. I'm a farmer, not an advisor, I said, voicing the doubt that had plagued me all day. What could I possibly offer that educated experts don't already know? Perspective, she replied simply. You've lived what they study. You understand the practical implications of theoretical policies. And, she added with gentle emphasis, you've proven you're willing to put everything on the line for what you believe in. That's rare, Eleanor. Rarer than expertise. I slept fitfully that night, dreams filled with images of James in his laboratory, of seeds sprouting into impossible shapes, of Reeves standing in my fields with fire in his hands. I woke before dawn, no clearer on my decision than I had been the previous day. The phone rang as I was feeding the chickens, the morning still gray and hushed around me. Sheriff Holt's name appeared on the screen. Morning, Dan, I answered, wedging the phone between ear and shoulder as I scattered feed. Ellie? His voice held an unusual note of excitement. Have you seen the news? Not yet. Something about Nexus? Not just Nexus, you. He paused dramatically. The story broke nationwide this morning. Farmer who saved the world's seeds. They're calling you a hero, Ellie. My hand stilled, feed scattering unheeded. What? Someone leaked details, not everything, but enough, about how you protected research that could have given corporations control over the global food supply. How you faced down armed mercenaries. It's everywhere. National news, social media, you name it. Dread pooled in my stomach. Dan, I never wanted that kind of attention. I know. His voice softened with understanding. But maybe it's not all bad. The story's focused on the bigger issue, corporate control versus agricultural freedom. You're just the face they've put to it. A pretty compelling one, if you ask me. After we hung up, I returned to the house and turned on the television with trepidation. Sure enough, there I was, an old photograph from the county fair 3 years ago, looking stern and weathered beside my prize-winning cattle. The chyron beneath read, "Widow farmers stand against corporate seed control." The report was surprisingly accurate in broad strokes, though details of the confrontation were sensationalized. They portrayed me as a crusading widow protecting her late husband's legacy against corporate raiders. Dramatic, but not entirely untrue. My phone began ringing incessantly. Local news outlets, then regional, then national. I let them all go to voicemail. By mid-morning, reporters had discovered my address, and vehicles began appearing at the end of my long drive, stopped only by the locked gate and no trespassing signs I'd installed after the incident. Marjorie Mason arrived around noon, bypassing the media encampment via the old service road that connected our properties. Quite the circus, she observed dryly, helping herself to coffee. I had to tell 3 different news vans they were trespassing on my bird sanctuary. I groaned, head in my hands. This is a nightmare. I never wanted any of this. Maybe not, she said thoughtfully, but sometimes what we want isn't as important as what needs to happen. Those seeds your James protected? People need to know they were at risk. People need to know someone stood against that risk. She patted my arm. Sometimes a story needs a hero, Ellie, whether the hero wants the job or not. As the day progressed, the media frenzy intensified. My phone died from constant calls. Sheriff Holt stationed a deputy at my gate to keep overzealous reporters from trespassing. Several neighbors formed an impromptu security detail, turning away anyone who tried approaching through adjacent properties. By evening, the story had evolved beyond my control. Hashtags trended, commentators debated. Agricultural activists cited me as an example of grassroots resistance to corporate overreach. I sat in the gathering darkness, overwhelmed by the unasked-for spotlight. Scout sensed my distress, pressing her warm body against my legs in silent comfort. Through the window, I could see the distant flashes of cameras at the end of my drive, like fireflies announcing a storm. "What would you do, James?" I whispered to the empty room. As if in answer, my gaze fell on the framed photograph of us beneath the oak tree on our wedding day. His eyes crinkled at the corners, that half-smile I'd loved so dearly lifting his mouth. I remembered what he'd said that day, when I'd worried about my lack of farming experience. You don't need to know everything, Ellie. You just need to know when to stand and when to adapt. The rest, you learn as you go. The words echoed across years, offering clarity where confusion had reigned. This attention, unwanted as it was, provided a platform. A chance to ensure James's work reached beyond our farm, beyond even the researchers, now studying his seeds. I reached for my phone and dialed Catherine Westcott's number. "I've been following the news," she said immediately upon answering. "Are you all right?" "Overwhelmed," I admitted. "But perhaps there's an opportunity here." "I'm listening." If I accept your offer, join your advisory board, would the foundation help me manage this exposure? Channel it toward education rather than sensationalism? Absolutely, she replied without hesitation. We have experience with media management and extensive contacts in agricultural education. Good. I took a deep breath. Because I'd like to transform part of the farm into a teaching center. Something focused on sustainable practices, seed saving, the importance of agricultural independence. I have the land. I have the practical knowledge. What I don't have is the infrastructure or resources. The idea had formed fully realized, as I spoke, as though it had been waiting dormant in my mind, like one of James's seeds requiring only the right conditions to germinate. The Simmons Institute for Agricultural Independence, Catherine mused. It has a certain ring to it. The James Simmons Institute, I corrected gently. This was his vision before it was mine. Of course. I could hear the smile in her voice. I'll have a proposal to you by tomorrow. This is exactly the kind of initiative the foundation was created to support. That night, for the first time since the media storm began, I slept soundly, dreamlessly. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges I couldn't yet imagine, but the direction felt right. A continuation rather than a deviation, a growing rather than a breaking. Morning brought no respite from the media presence, but it did bring clarity and purpose. I dressed carefully in my best work clothes. Clean jeans, a plaid shirt James had always liked, boots polished but still bearing the honest scuffs of daily use. I braided my silver hair neatly, secured it with a band, and squared my shoulders before the mirror. Well, I told my reflection, if they want a story, let's give them one worth telling. Sheriff Holt met me at the gate, concern evident in his expression. You sure about this, Ellie? Once you step into that spotlight, there's no stepping back. I'm sure, I said with more confidence than I felt. Some things are worth the discomfort. He nodded, understanding in his eyes. I've got deputies keeping order. Just say the word if it gets to be too much. As the gate swung open, cameras swiveled toward me, a forest of microphones extending like strange mechanical flowers. Reporters called questions, their voices overlapping, into unintelligible noise. I raised a hand, and surprisingly, they quieted. My name is Eleanor Simmons, I began, voice carrying clearly in the morning air. I'm a farmer, not a hero or an activist. But my husband, Dr. James Simmons, was both. 8 years ago, he chose principle over profit, humanity over corporate interest. He protected research that could have been weaponized against the very people it was meant to help. Farmers like me, like my neighbors, like millions worldwide who depend on the ability to save and replant their own seeds. The cameras clicked and whirred, recording my every word. I continued, gaining confidence as I spoke. 3 months ago, when those who sought to control rather than share that research came to claim it, I made a choice. The same choice any of you would make to protect something vital. That choice has brought consequences, attention I never wanted, questions I never expected to answer. But it has also brought opportunity. I gestured to the farm stretching behind me, to the fields where James and I had worked side by side, to the land that had sustained us through joy and grief alike. Today, I'm announcing the establishment of the James Simmons Institute for Agricultural Independence. Here on this farm, we will teach sustainable practices, seed-saving techniques, and the importance of maintaining agricultural diversity and freedom. We will continue James's work, not in hiding, but in the open where it belongs. A reporter called out, "Mrs. Simmons, are you concerned about further corporate retaliation?" I met her gaze steadily. The best protection isn't secrecy. It's transparency. It's thousands of farmers carrying forward the knowledge that was nearly lost. It's ensuring that no single entity, corporate or governmental, controls the seeds that feed humanity. Another voice. What would you say to those who argue that corporations have the right to protect their research investments? I'd say there's a profound difference between reasonable profit and dangerous control, I replied. Innovation should be rewarded. Monopolization of essential resources should not. The line between them isn't always clear, but it exists, and we ignore it at our peril. The questions continued, and I answered as honestly as I could, drawing on years of conversations with James, on my own experiences, on the wisdom earned through working the land. When my voice began to tire, Sheriff Holt stepped forward, announcing the end of the impromptu press conference. As I turned to walk back to the house, a final question rang out. Mrs. Simmons, do you consider yourself brave? I paused, considering. Bravery isn't about fearlessness, I said finally. It's about recognizing when something matters more than your fear. Anyone can be brave by that measure. Anyone can stand for what they believe in. I'm just fortunate that when my moment came, I recognized it. The weeks that followed brought changes I could never have anticipated. The Lowell Foundation expedited funding for the Institute, converting my unused equipment barn into a classroom and demonstration space. Agricultural students began arriving for internships, their youthful energy and enthusiasm breathing new life into the farm. Media interest gradually shifted from my confrontation with Nexus to the broader issues the Institute addressed: seed sovereignty, sustainable farming, the balance between innovation and independence. I found myself speaking to agricultural conferences via video link, consulting with lawmakers crafting legislation to prevent future Nexus-like monopolies, sharing James's vision with an ever-widening audience. The farm remained my home, my sanctuary, but it had become something more as well, a symbol, a classroom, a living testament to the power of principled resistance. On a crisp December morning, exactly 4 months after the incident, I stood in the back 40 where James's seeds had been buried for so long. The ground was frozen now, dusted with the first snow of winter, beautiful in its temporary barrenness. In spring, this field would be planted with the first crop of Simmons heritage seeds, James's countermeasure strain, now being reproduced in agricultural research stations worldwide. I heard footsteps crunching through the frost behind me and turned to find Marjorie Mason approaching, bundled against the cold. "Thought I might find you out here," she said, handing me a thermos of coffee. "Contemplating your empire?" I smiled at her, teasing. "Hardly an empire." "No?" She gestured toward the farm buildings where interns could be seen moving between the new classroom and the greenhouse we'd constructed. "Looks to me like you're building something significant, Ellie. Something that will outlast both of us." I sipped the coffee, letting its warmth spread through me. "I hope so. That's the point of farming, isn't it? Planting things that continue growing after you're gone." "Indeed it is." She gazed across the winter landscape, her breath clouding the air. "James would be proud, you know. Not just of what you protected, but of what you're creating with it."